早晨，各位議員。
Good morning, members. We shall continue with the first session of the debate. Ms. Elizabeth Quat. Ms. Elizabeth Quat. Sorry, I just turned on my microphone. Thank you, President. In this session, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for all those working on the front line fighting the epidemic. For example, the healthcare staff, the civil servants, government officers, volunteers, and all those personnel. Due to their contribution, we managed to withstand it till now. I would like to cheer for them. I received some feedback from the front line, and they are quite worried about the recent developments and their own safety. First, I must urge the government to provide all the frontline workers an adequate PPEs, and hopefully can expeditiously provide RAT packs for them. Probably it's ideal to have 2 tests per day and at a minimum 1 test daily, so that they can return home without having to worry whether they would infect their family members. And now the epidemic has raged on more than 2 years. This 5th wave is quite serious, and yesterday we have over 4,000 confirmed cases, and there are probably 7,000 preliminary positive, and now there are tens of thousands of people waiting at home to be admitted into hospital. I believe that this is not an accurate figure, as we have a lot of cases tested positive through RAT. However, they are waiting confirmation from the government for many days already, including the members from the DAB. Right now, out there in the community, there should be a lot more people infected, and more than the 10,000 estimated. This is very worrying. Our testing capacity and our healthcare facilities is buckling. We are reaching a critical juncture. Fortunately, at this juncture, the country decided to step in full force. We're actually quite worried about the situation, as we see a 3-year-old girl passed away, and a lot of elderly passed away as well. I would like to send my condolences to the patients and the family of and the loved ones of those passed away. And yesterday, the President Xi's issued instruction of 3 alls and 2 ensures, demonstrating his concern for Hong Kong, which is quite motivating. And Mr. Xia Baolong chaired coordination meeting in Shenzhen to ensure that we win this battle. We need to protect the safety of Hong Kong. This is a shot in the arm for us. With the support of the central authorities, the government and the citizens will need to do their bit in beating back the pandemic. And I would like the government to do a better job in coordinating, that every civil service and each department should give their utmost and fully cooperate and work with the mainland experts. And the public should stand in solidarity and make their own contribution. For example, getting vaccinated and get tested and maintain social distancing and minimize going out. For myself, I'll continue to mobilize the IT sector, including the volunteer team for the Smart City Alliance, in the hope that helping the government to enhance the application of smart technology. The DAB has its own volunteer corps, and recently we are recruiting more volunteers. At this stage, our volunteers are working in the front lines by serving in the back office. I believe that more people would join us. when the government mobilizes us, that we will all be ready to help fight this epidemic. Once again, I'd like to thank the motherland and the mainland compatriots for their care and love. Well, 2 years into this war and with the outbreak of the fifth wave, highlighted Hong Kong's shortcomings, which is plain for all to see. We need to do a good job beating back the epidemic. The government always claimed to be precise, for example, early identification, and diagnosis and treatment. We know our shortcomings. We're not the worst in the world. However, compared to the mainland cities, I wouldn't say we're doing a good job. At this point, on one hand, we need to handle our task in hand, and on the other hand, we should be more prepared to cope with future waves. Well, the shortcomings and weaknesses, for example, lax control import cases, insufficient testing capacity in terms of personnel and materials, and insufficient healthcare and isolation facilities. A lot of members have mentioned that the lack of use of IT. We failed to learn from the success in the mainland and failed to exploit the Chinese medicine. On each point, there is lots of room for improvement. On preventing the imported cases, I will not repeat, as we all know that some Cathay air crew, due to their own selfish acts, put Hong Kong into this mess. In terms of technology, we can definitely do a better job. Well, we're using Stone Age methods to fight this virus. However, we can never catch up with the spread. Well, the Leave Home Safe and the Vaccine Pass, even though the Vaccine Pass require real-time registration, however, there's no tracking function in the Leave Home Safe app. When we have a small number of cases, we can mobilize the disciplinary officers to conduct manual contact tracing. However, we have more cases that we can't cope with the workload. Therefore, it's hard to trace the source at this point. As we can note that we are simply tracking down too slowly. No matter how hard our officers are working, well, if you're using pen and paper, there's no way you can track them in time. Well, it's a hard work and inefficient. The top priority for the government that it should unshackle to their old thinking and old ways. It would make reference to the health code implemented in China for real name registration and tracking function. Since we do not have the tracking function, therefore it's hard to do big data analysis and could not perform track and trace. When the virus spread, it put us in a mess. A lot of the IT volunteers are happy to help. I remember back in February 2020, the volunteers in the Smart City Alliance within 3 days managed to help the government to come up with the COVID-19 dashboard, which we are using now. We managed to come up with this in 3 days. And during this time, we've been offering suggestions to the government, whether for the penny-based management or tracking and analysis and big data or enhancement to the Leave Home Safe app. Unfortunately, the government did not have the time to talk to us, especially the Center for Health Protection was top busy. We've done a lot, we're just waiting for the government to adopt the suggestions. Our hands are tied. If we do not have privacy concerns or technology barriers is simply a matter for the government to decide. I hope the government can get in touch with us. I'm sure that a lot in my sector are happy to help. On the testing arrangements, in terms of penny-based arrangement and testing arrangement, was hampered by the lack of data. And while information dissemination is one major weakness, a lot of the misinformation is floating around. We need to click on 20 links before getting the right information we need. These can all be consolidated into one single platform. If the government fails to harness technology, the government will only become slow and chaotic and mistake-prone. The mainland health code is now running around the country and is proven to be a success. Well, we need to meet with the mainland experts to improve our Leave Home Safe app and turn it into the local health code system. And second, we failed to learn from the mainland success, including universal mandatory testing, whether in Wuhan or Qingdao or Tianjin. When cases was first reported even in Shenzhen, and they were immediately ordered universal mandatory testing for the community or even at a larger scale, so as to identify the infected cases, which then they were quarantined and cut off the transmission chain. Hong Kong has been reluctant to take this step. It was reported that there will be a citywide testing, that 75 million to be tested in 3 weeks. However, our testing capacity is not big enough. We need to leverage on the Shenzhen testing facilities and mainland personnel. I support all these solutions. Well, without a citywide lockdown, would it lead to the spread of the virus? The government experts will need to look into it. Well, universal mandatory testing must happen. If we do not have sufficient testing capacity, we can leverage on the Shenzhen testing facilities, which I would vote with my feet. And for those who have been tested, the bottle only contains a number but no personal details. Well, even if we need to carry the bottles around the boundary, however, there's no privacy concerns here. Therefore, I hope the general public can support this. Another lesson we failed to learn from the mainland will be the application of Chinese medicine. Take Tianjin, for example. When cases were first reported, the Chinese medicine will step in. The Chinese medicine will treat the light cases, while the severe cases will be treated by Chinese and Western medicine. And some of the medications have been confirmed to be therapeutic, and some of the OTC medicine are now sold out. With 8,000 TCM practitioners, the government refused to enlist them to fight this epidemic. As a lot of members say that Hong Kong should take this step, and the government should buy these OTC medications to the confirmed cases to relieve their symptoms. President, well, we just endorsed the 6th round of the AEF injection. Well, top priority for the public is to defeat the virus so that we can reopen our boundaries of the mainland and restart our lives. We must stand in solidarity to make this happen. For all government departments and every Hong Kong people, we need to do our utmost to do this together so that we can beat back the virus with the support of the motherland. So long as we work together, we can definitely beat back the virus. President, I still submit. Ms. Maggie Chan.
主席啊，
Thank you, President. I'd like to earnestly express my gratitude to those working at the frontier, including the healthcare professionals and the volunteers. And it's a representative from the women organization. I'd like to work together with them. We have to race with time, and I suggest that the government should mobilize the non-healthcare teams so as to encourage people to work from home as far as possible. We should also set up a hotline in order to provide comprehensive services to those in need. And we should also mobilize those working in the Western medicine and also TCM sector so that they can also provide consultation services online. And we should also lift the requirement that people are do not have to wear face masks when they're engaging in outdoor activities. I'd like to thank all the volunteers who have taken the risk to work at the front line, and they're working day and night in order to serve us. And we would also have to make very good use of the support and resources from the central authorities so that isolation treatment and the provision of daily necessities to Hong Kong can also sustain. President, in order to really win over or win the battle of the epidemic, well, the dynamic zero infection policy has to be accomplished, and I suggest that in the 18 districts we should conduct a stage approach by conducting universal testing for all citizens, and we can just identify one district so that we can conduct a pilot scheme, and then we can learn from the examples of the central authorities. We can also introduce the 3-color health code, and we can also give priority to certain vulnerable citizens so that they can be given the jab. But then I think all these measures are important, and we need to introduce the real name system. We should also introduce the 3-color scheme to the Leave Home Safe app so that within specified time, people from a particular district would not be permitted to go into another district. For example, if I'm living in District A, during the mandatory closure for testing, I would not be allowed to go to District B until and unless the compulsory testing has been completed, and only vaccinated citizens will be given this green code, and they would also become the first batch of people holding the green code in the Leave Home Safe app. And for those who are not able to go to another district for work, we suggest that they should also be given this special relief fund. So in order to ensure that people will be able to understand government's measures more directly, in particular, we will also have to combat fake news and misunderstanding in the community. I suggest that the government should make the best use of RTHK's channel 31 and 32 so that they can be turned into dedicated channels to fight the pandemic so that they can provide or disseminate information round the clock. And then for testing, isolation, quarantine, and also counseling services and so on can also be provided via those channels. Our motherland has always been our biggest supporter, and I'd like to thank the central authorities for its support to the SAR government in fighting the pandemic. Definitely will be able to rise out of this, and I'd like to support the motion of thanks, and these are my remarks. Thank you. Mr. Lam San Keung. Your mic is not on. Thank you, President. Like other lawmakers, I'm very grateful to Mr. Xi Jinping for this very important instruction from him. So he has told us that we will have to take whatever is necessary in order to stabilize the situation, and in order to ensure health and safety for everyone, we have to stabilize the situation, and whoever is in trouble, others will come around to help. So the central authorities have been very concerned about this, and they care and love us. And during the 2003 SARS outbreak, everybody can see that we have been working together to fight the pandemic, and this time the situation is even more severe. But then so long as we can stand united, we will be able to win this battle. And therefore, I call upon everyone in Hong Kong to display the spirit of mutual help, and we should also be very understanding about the healthcare sector as well as the those working in the government. They have been working very hard to help us. And as a former president of the Law Society, I've also been supported by the chairman of the Bar Association. Our sector will be working together to support the work of the government, and we will also be helping the government as well as the community in resolving any legal issues that they might be concerned about. And on this motion of thanks motion, I'd like to support it. That's my gratitude to Mrs. Carrie Lam for announcing this policy address. These are my remarks. Next, Ms. Starry LEE. President, Hong Kong's epidemic situation has gotten worse, and we have had a couple of days where the infection number has gone beyond 1,000, and there has been a lot of panic in the community, and people are actually trying to scramble up all the daily necessities, and the situation has never been seen during the previous waves of the epidemic. I think the most important thing is for everybody to work together and stand united in order to uphold our healthcare system. We will have to protect our children and our elders because they are the most vulnerable groups in the wake of the epidemic. Definitely with the central authority support, we will be able to win this war. And the DAP wrote 3 times to the chief executives last week. We will have to shorten the waiting time for testing so that we can have early identification and isolation as well as treatment. And we support the central authorities' attempt to send teams to come over to Hong Kong to help. And many of our suggestions have been responded to by the SAR government positively. And some of these would also have to be followed up. We will continue to strive for these measures to be implemented. I'd like to report on the progress that has been made. First, on improving testing. Well, the situation back then was that people would have to line up because of the compulsory testing measure, and they would have to wait for hours in the inclement weather, and therefore we wrote to the SR government, and thanks to the government's acceptance of a suggestion, they've also introduced the disk distribution machine, and there would also be measures to ensure that there would be caring teams and so on. And we have also sent out volunteers to help maintain law and order. And 3 times a day, we would also be reporting on the queuing situation at the testing stations. In fact, the situation has significantly improved recently. And the SAR government would be introducing this universal testing in order to enhance the capacity of Hong Kong's testing. In fact, other than having the Huoyan laboratory, we would also have to review our testing methods. We would also have to make good use of the resources from the mainland so that within limited time and limited resources, we'll be able to enhance our capacity in testing. Well, the situation is worsening very rapidly, and therefore the work will have to be done very comprehensively. Other than relying on the central authority support, we will also have to make sure that our medical system and also our elders and children can be properly taken care of. And we can do the following. First, we will have to increase the number of testing and quarantine facilities in order to avoid or prevent cross-infections or cross-contamination or infection. We will also have to mobilize more people to join the healthcare team, and we will also have to disseminate the information properly, in particular for those who are waiting for testing at home. And also, we will also have to take care of the most vulnerable groups. Those are the elders and the children. They would also have to be vaccinated. I hope that the Secretary will be reporting to us positively as to what is going to be done to set up centers for vaccination for the elders and children so that whoever is willing to take the jab can get the jab. And the CE also talk about a number of measures in order to cope with the situation, including making use of newly completed housing estates, and also there would also be quarantine facilities set up in hotels and so on. But then I'd like to say that there are more than 10,000 people who are still waiting in the community, and therefore the most important thing is to do it quick. And every day there are confirmed cases approaching us, and this morning we also saw that elders were also very worried and they were crying because they didn't want to infect their grandchildren and so on, and therefore they would like to be isolated as soon as possible, and therefore the DAB would like the administration to try its best to make use of resort villages and also vacant school campuses and so on, and also coliseums and so on can also be used. They could also be converted into temporary isolation centers and quarantine centers so that they can be used by those in need. In particular, the DAB has also suggested to the CE that we will have to mobilize the healthcare sectors, including those working in the private sector, for example, those working in the private sector, and also the TCM sector to work with us, because we have received a lot of complaints from the community. Well, even if they were having a fever, well, elders and children would still have to stay in the community, and some parents also approach us. They'd like to go to the hospital for treatment, but then during this very critical time, they might not be able to get a bed in the hospital for treatment. And therefore, I earnestly hope that I'd like to urge the government to work with private hospitals as suggested by some, so that the private sector can also provide support to us in terms of other emergency services, so that more resources can be set aside to take care of the confirmed COVID cases. Well, whenever they have a fever, there should be beds and resources to take care of them, and private doctors and TCM practitioners could also provide distant or remote consultation so that their condition will not get worse. And also, TCM practitioners can also go to the AWE. Whoever is willing to join the scheme, TCM practitioners can also take care of those with mild or no symptoms. That would also ease the burden on those working at the front line. But the country, in dealing with those with severe, mild, and no symptoms, have got the experience that TCM has been very effective, and therefore we should make reference to their experience on the mainland. We should also adopt the TCM approach in tackling this disease. In particular, in terms of prevention and treatment, that should also be applied to Hong Kong. We should also invite TCM representatives to join the relevant anti-epidemic committee so that Hong Kong's work can integrate both Western and Chinese medicine. Another thing that has been criticized is about the dissemination of information. We support that the government is going to set up a hotline to support the community. In the past, we already suggested that something be done about it. And we should make use of existing channels to step up the dissemination of information. And many people are now staying home, some for the purpose of quarantine, and others are working. And they have no idea as to what is the real information, and therefore if we're able to step up the dissemination of information through these channels, then that would also enable the public to have a better understanding of the situation, and they can work together to fight the epidemic. Well, other than making suggestions to improve the situation, we've been standing at the front line. We have been standing with the community in fighting this disease in terms of the supply of resources and daily necessities, and also to get and also to disseminate the information to them and so on. Recently, some lawmakers and also district officers have also been infected. Earlier on, there was also another community officer who was also infected. It shows that we have been working very hard at the front line to serve the community, and therefore I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to those who have been working at the front line, and we will continue to support the ASEAN government in its fight of the pandemic, and our volunteers will continue to provide backup services in order to reflect the community's sentiment so that we can work together to win the battle. Next, I'd like to turn to the policy address. On behalf of the DAB, we'd like to make a comprehensive assessment on this. Well, this policy address was announced before the fifth wave of the epidemic. I think it's somewhat different because much of the content should be discussed. Despite the fact that this is the last policy address of the CE, but then if you look at the content, it's not just a summary of what has been done by this term of the government. In fact, it's a visionary, and it also tells us what it's going to do. There is also a comprehensive plan for the years to come, and it shows that the ASEAN government, in terms of its mindset, has been very positive and it like to put us back on the right track of development, and is also determined to resolve some of the deep-rooted problems. And that would also be good or conducive to the interface of the two terms of government. And a lot of our suggestions have been accepted. For example, in terms of anti-North development and also the review of wages and so on. Well, that's in line with the overall direction of our suggestions. And of course, there are some details that have to be sorted out.
All in all, we welcome the announcement of the policy address. We would like the government to continue to implement the measures and resolve livelihood issues and improve people's lifestyles. So I submit. With these remarks, I support the policy address and the motion of thanks. Mr. Rock Chan, or Dr. Junius Ho, rather. Mr. President, thank you for acting in such a flexible manner so that we can have this theme before others in this debate. And I thank the central government for showing their concern. Article 12 of the Basic Law states that Hong Kong SAR is a special administrative region enjoying a high degree of autonomy, and it comes under the central government. And therefore, the central government has the right to promulgate administrative directives, and the SAR government must comply with such directives. President Xi says kind words yesterday, saying that Hong Kong SAR government must be the main player in this fight against the epidemic, and also to do whatever it takes to maintain stability in Hong Kong. We have come along in a lot of ups and downs for 2 years now. We have been asking the SAR government to learn from the central government's practices, but we haven't reached this goal. We haven't even set the clear objectives. We have not been able to achieve the zero infection goal, and our communication with the mainland remains shut down. In January, we experienced the outbreak, the fifth wave of the outbreak, affecting a lot of people's life and health. So now it's turned into a national security issue. Therefore, this campaign must be now led by the central government. Therefore, the health ministry, health authorities of the mainland should be tasked with the mission to deal with the epidemic together with the SAR. This is understandable. I think everyone in the Hong Kong SAR government and all civil servants must understand that the national policy is to achieve the dynamic zero infection. What does it entail in terms of work measures? Our leaders in the SAR must be clear about this. There's no room for ambiguity. There are 3 important tasks involved. First, proactively identify sources of transmission. Secondly, once identified, quick measures be adopted to intervene. And there should be proper control measures to handle close contacts, conduct tracing studies, and reduce congregation of people. And thirdly, provide effective treatment, reduce the number of serious cases, reduce the number of mortal cases. So the national policy of dynamic zero infection is all about life, or the importance of life. So living with the virus is not an option here. I have to point out here that every civil servant must live up to his or her oath, and that is to bear allegiance to the PRC's SAR government and the basic law, and be loyal to the Special Administrative Region government. Therefore, any inaction or breach or violation of the oath may result in dismissal, and if collusion with foreign forces is involved, it will be a violation of the national security law, and once convicted, might be subject to imprisonment. Mr. President, I have heard many members speaking on this theme. They all have similar themes. They have been urging the SAR government to prevent cases from entering Hong Kong, and also to handle the local situation quickly. And now the Hong Kong Macau office, the State Council, and the National Health Ministry and the SAR government will work together to fight the epidemic. I'm pleased to learn about that, and I look forward to Hong Kong SAR government taking measures, implementing 10 measures. First, conduct a community-wide testing, and also secondly, decisively introduce a curfew, and then 3, introduce a health code, and fourthly, construct provisional facilities for treatment, and then introduce more quarantine facilities, and then also to introduce healthcare workers from the mainland to help us. And 6, making use of facilities, similar facilities in the mainland to meet local needs. And also 7, provide treatment in both Western medicine and TCM to patients, and also provide caring service to those affected. And also, we should learn from the mainland's practice of providing quarantine facilities for returning pilots and crew of airlines. And also, we have to conduct tracing more actively to cut the transmission. And also, the government should act decisively to implement the necessary measures as mentioned, so that we can achieve the goal of zero infection as early as possible. Here, I would like to stress that in my own experience, everyone working on the front line has been acting diligently. However, sometimes they seem to be at a loss. Now we have to heed the advice of the central government at every turn, and that would mean that we'll be able to achieve greater success. So I submit. Mr. Rock Chen. Mr. President, as the fifth wave of the epidemic worsens in Hong Kong, I think it's very gratifying that the presidency has given us some important instructions. And now we have the national support of the whole country. And I believe the measures proposed will result in some achievement. It's been said that we are going to have a community-wide testing very soon, and some germ will be helping Hong Kong to test the collected samples very quickly. This is in line with the President's instruction that this should be a top priority, and we should take every measure possible to deal with the epidemic. I await further announcement from the SAR government. But in the community, there are still two opposing concepts about how we should go about this. And that is whether it should be zero infection or we should try to live with the virus. To me, this is a very important concept, and I have no doubt about which one to go. We should go with the national goal of the zero infection. We should not waver. We should not be indecisive in any way. What has happened in the past couple of months has informed us that we cannot bear with the loss that would result from the concept of living with the virus, living with COVID. Our healthcare system cannot bear the burden. But to achieve the zero infection objective, we must have corresponding measures and mechanisms. I urge the Hong Kong SAR government to learn from the successful experience of the mainland, and there should be more exchanges and communication with big cities such as Tianjin, Shanghai, etc. Although we have a different administrative system, but we must be open to new ideas. We have to be innovative to overcome the bottlenecks of the system. I'm grateful to the central government in terms of the supply of manpower and testing facilities and testing capacity. Now we have the resources needed. The SAR government should work hard and start immediately to come up with visionary measures. For example, if the number of cases has risen from 4,500 to 8,000 or even to more than 10,000, what should we do? We have to take care of all these scenarios, and we have to get prepared. But to get prepared very soon. Many members have offered valuable suggestions. There's no need for me to repeat them. But I would like to say that we must have the Home Safe app converted into one with real name registration and tracking functions. And we should step up collaboration between public and private healthcare centers so that chronic cases of a non-emergency nature should be handled by the private sector, so that the public sector has the greater capacity to deal with the epidemic. And also for civil servants working at home, they should be asked to go to the community to provide supporting work. And we can also learn, borrow venues and camps from NGOs for quarantine. Last week, volunteer groups were formed by many NGOs to provide support. And I'm talking about the fraternities, associations. They are very valuable in donating resources to help those in need in the community. Lastly, I would like to thank all the healthcare workers, the paramedical personnel, civil servants, volunteer groups, taxi drivers, and everyone who has contributed to the fight against the epidemic. I firmly believe that with the support of the central government and as long as we remain united, we will be able to fight and prevail over this epidemic. So I submit. Mr. Louis Loon. Mr. President, so the theme is emerging from the epidemic. It has evoked a lot of feelings in me. We have experienced a number of waves in this epidemic. We have survived those, but now in 2022, we seem to be at a loss when the fifth wave comes. It seems that the efforts we expanded previously have come to loss. Many people, elderly people and young children have been affected. I'm saddened by this. Why is it that this time the impact is so severe? What are the shortcomings in our mechanism and systems? What more should be done? Many members have given their views yesterday and today. I don't want to repeat what has been already said. But I would like to say that Hong Kong is well equipped to do this time. We have a very good healthcare system, very good team of healthcare workers, and a consensus population, exercising a lot of self-discipline. I would like to make an appeal here. Those who have not been vaccinated, especially elderly people and young children, please get vaccinated soon.
嘅方法
as they are the best defenses against the virus. In terms of weaknesses, it is in the coordination and the over-execution. Well, with the full support of our country, so long as the government can fully implement President Xi's instructions and take up the main responsibility and expeditiously stabilize the epidemic situation as the overriding priority in order to restore public confidence and offering them hope, then we can stand in solidarity and beat back the virus. And very soon, we can get back to our normal lives. I so submit. Mr. Shu Cafe. Thank you, President. Well, recently, the community is in a state of panic and hysteria. Some judge the government's performance in fighting the epidemic as awful. The government is learning on the go. In the previous fourth wave, well, in terms of the methodology and tactics, I believe that Hong Kong did a fairly good job, especially when it spent 300 billions. For example, the employment support scheme and e-voucher scheme and rent reductions and a 100% loan guarantee scheme and the principal moratorium. That since the last May, our economy healed quickly, and by Christmas we all recalled that the city was bustling with life. I believe that when our boundary reopen, the tourists will return, and we will return to the good old days. The budgets predicted a surplus of $6 billion instead of a huge deficit. On balancing economic interests and public health, decided to keep some of the companies operating, as demonstrated in the fourth wave. From that moment, some in the public commended the government's performance. Unfortunately, on this fifth wave, we underestimated the power of the Omicron virus, and the cross-family gathering during the CNY aggravated the situation to the point of out of control. Over the past week or so, the public is in a state of panic. The daily caseload kept rising. The healthcare system was overwhelmed, while the vegetable prices shot up dramatically. I would like to tell the public, please calm down. The SR government now reset. Well, last Saturday, the Chief Secretary led a few secretaries to Shenzhen to discuss with the Guangdong government on how to fight the epidemic together. And the CE has appointed 5 secretaries to head various task forces. The presidency yesterday gave an important instruction of 3 alls and 2 unsures to stabilize the epidemic as soon as possible and mobilize all forces and resources to ensure the safety and health of Hong Kong citizens and our social stability. To keep the virus under control, well, the government will need to refine its tactic used in the third and the fourth wave. On yesterday's panel on health services, I urged the Secretary, Professor Sophie Chen, asking the mainland to present personnel for universal testing. This is not just a slogan. We need to think about the execution. To achieve universal testing, first we need to have the venue to accommodate the infected cases. Out there in the community, there are a lot of carriers, and however, they couldn't be admitted to the hospital due to the lack of hospital beds and waiting to be sent to the facilities. However, in the interim, they might have infected their family members. I believe that we do need 20 to 30 units available. We look into the public housing units, hotels, schools, and sports centers, and community centers, or the cruise terminal, Ocean Park, the West Kowloon. All the space must be considered. It would provide a bed and a blanket and food and equipment. We can accommodate the patients. For the severe cases, we must send them to hospital right away. And while the non-severe cases and procedures must be suspended, I would like to tell you a story. Some resident told me on the 7th day of the CNY that after going out on that day, her daughter was confirmed positive on the 10th day of the CNY. Up to now, she was yet sent to the isolation facility or hospital. However, since she was vaccinated, since the onset, after 2 days of fever and a bit of cough, the girl was more or less all right. However, it's still preferred that she get a checkup at hospital. My appeal to the Hong Kong public, please stay calm. If you're vaccinated, it will prevent a severe infection and you can recover very soon. That's why we don't need to send everyone to the hospital. We just need to find some space to isolate them. However, we must segregate these infected cases from our community before carrying out universal testing. For citywide testing, we need to have sufficient supplies and healthcare equipment and food. For medical supplies, the SAR and the central authorities have arranged in Guangdong province, have organized a lot of supplies to find their way to Hong Kong. On food like vegetables, on the 4th day of CNY, when it was first reported of a truck driver infected, I've told Frank Chan, within a week, I've been talking to Chinese liaison office and the transport sector on how to stabilize vegetable supplies and other kind of foods as well. As you can see, yesterday the SR government announced that the vegetable supply was at 70% normal levels, and the fresh meat was around 60%, and there was had never been no shortage of pork. Therefore, the public don't need to worry. In terms of manpower, how do we mobilize them to help carry out testing? The government should recruit more volunteers. The Liberal Party set up the anti-epidemic volunteer team. If the government require them, well, I don't mind not going home for a week or a month or 3 months. I'm more than happy to do something like heavy lifting or transporting or even throwing away rubbish. At this moment, the Hong Kong public are willing to volunteer, so long as you mobilize us. There are always plenty of people available. And so how do we stable our society? We need to stabilize our business sector. You must support the companies and save the company and their jobs. And yesterday we approved the latest injection to the anti-epidemic fund. I hope that the CE can consider the 7th round for a short-term employment support scheme can help various industries to survive this. In terms of rent, I hope that the CE can take the lead to cut the rent and appeal to all the developers and landowners to come up with a rent reduction proposal for the next few months, so that we businesses can stay open and keep our jobs. If the owners run into trouble, I hope that the government can lengthen the principal moratorium plan and the 100% loan guarantee scheme. You raise the ceiling and extend the period so that we can maintain our liquidity. Finally, I would like to say this to the government. We must pull all stops to resolve this crisis. We need to bite the bullet now. We must achieve dynamic zero infections before we can move forward. As for now, our healthcare system is overwhelmed. A few days ago, a lot of people around us told me that hope to coexist with the virus. Is it feasible? Well, as we can see now, how we have such long queues outside hospitals and the seniors and children fatalities, and the supporters of the coexistence stay muted and kept silent. Therefore, we need to ensure that zero cases and protect our lives and health. We need to stabilize the society. So long as we put our heads together, we can weather the storm. Thank you, President. Professor Lau Chi Pang. Thank you, President. First, I'm very grateful for President Xi's love and concern for Hong Kong. This is really a shot in the arm in our anti-epidemic efforts. I would like to take this opportunity to express gratitude to those working in the front line in the bus office, whether in the government or in the civic community. The work has prevented outbreaks in the past. I believe that there will be a universal even though there's much speculation that how this whole population got tested for 3 times in a short period. I have the following suggestion. This is a major crisis for Hong Kong. However, this is also a huge opportunity for us to have everyone help to fight the epidemic. That's what I expected from President Xi's. In the past, we regarded the work of fighting the epidemic as just a government's job or the healthcare staff. Well, and also with a lot of volunteers. As if the public has no role in this. I hope the government can consider the following. On the testing mechanism, how come up with ways to test it once or several times. I suggested that we make use of our existing mechanism, that in government departments we have 180,000 strong civil servants with different departments and head of departments, and also the statutory bodies, the university and secondary schools and NGOs and hospitals. These bodies are staffed with people. What happened to those members of the public, the district council and the district office can mobilize the owners incorporated and the mutual aid committees to knock door to door for testing. In these 2 days, I heard from my electrical colleagues, they themselves have been working with the community organizations as part of the anti-epidemic effort. How do we should rely on the existing social fabric instead of calling for a mass work stoppage and queuing for testing after work, or closing our lockdown to get tested. I believe that the senior civil servants who come can resolve the technicalities.
I hope that this testing can be conducted in the most efficient and effective manner so that we can achieve the target of having everybody tested within a short space of time. So if we are able to make use of our ID cards, and then as you can imagine, for the 7 million plus people, you might expect to see excessively long queues. And therefore, the most important thing is for us to unite together so that for the Hong Kong people, we do have our responsibilities. And for department heads and also subvented organizations and NGOs and so on, and also district organizations, persons in charge and so on. So every one of them should take up their own responsibilities to help us fight the epidemic together so that we will be efficient, and we would not be restraining or constraining the movements of people so that their freedoms will not be adversely affected. What I'm most concerned is that we might have to bring our ID card and then we will have to wait in long queues for testing. That's not what I'd like to see. These are my remarks, and I support this motion. Thank you. Mr. Michael Tian. Thank you, President. I think the most important thing today is fighting the epidemic. Well, to be honest, during the past 2 years, there are credits that we should give to the SAR government because the number of confirmed cases has kept low for a very long period of time. But then probably people might have become complacent, and it's like playing a soccer game, and you will have to make sure that you do your job throughout the 90 minutes. Well, initially you might have done very well, but then if you just fail in the last minute, it's still you're still going to lose. And therefore, the administration has shown that there are shortcomings. Fortunately, we have Mr. Xi and also the central authorities, and Mr. Xi has also given very important instructions, and the Hong Kong Macau office has also shown that they are very concerned about us, and they are prepared to give us all their support. And therefore, the central authorities will be giving us full support so that Hong Kong government will be able to do its job in fighting the epidemic. I think in Hong Kong, the difficulty is that we don't have enough manpower and resources. But then with the central authorities and the Guangdong provincial support, I'm sure that all the problems can be resolved. I read this news report. Probably it happened yesterday, and I was very excited in reading this. The central authorities would be fighting this war together with us. And we have already got over 10,000 confirmed cases, and many people have to stay home. In the end, they will be infecting all their family members, and the number of infections will only go up. And therefore, what is most important is to provide isolation spaces. And the CE already announced that all the quarantine hotels will be turned into isolation centers. That's a good thing. And also for those who carry the virus, they will also have to be isolated in order to cut the transmission chain. At this juncture, the most critical thing is about the number of severe cases or even fatal cases. Well, for those who are over 3, there are some over 1 million that have not been vaccinated yet, and there are some 2.23 million people who have only got the first jab. And then for those who need the booster dose, we have some 5.9 million. And for those over 60, there are many who haven't yet got the first jab, and therefore the most critical thing is to mobilize everyone so that we will go to the residential care homes to help with the vaccination, and we will have to tell them that you will have to get the jab, and get the jab. And the most important thing can be rehearsed 5 times, and the central authorities will definitely help us. According to the WHO, well, for the deactivated vaccine, you will have to take it once every, well, the interval can only be 3 months, and therefore we should complete the 3 doses within a very short space of time. And next, we will have to increase the number of ICU beds. As far as I'm aware, there are only several hundred available, and that could be bursting to the seam very shortly. And now with this injection of confidence in us from Mr. Xi Jinping, I'm sure the central authorities will help us build the mobile cabin hospital very quickly, so that for those with severe symptoms, they can be treated at the ICU, and then they'll be able to keep their lives. There's also this new drug called Paxlovid, and that has been approved by the FDA, and everybody is scrambling to get some of that. And those with severe symptoms without vaccination, if they can take this drug early, then within 5 days, then 90% of them can be cured. And I understand that the SL government is trying to procure some of these. I hope that the government will work as fast as possible so that they can procure more such drugs because they are very important for us in Hong Kong. Thank you. Next, Mr. Dennis Lam. Thank you, President. First, I have to declare interest because my company has also been involved in PCR and nuclear exit tests. And I'd like to thank the frontline officials as well as the healthcare professionals for their wholehearted contribution to this. Well, with COVID-19, we have now got the 5th wave of outbreak, and tens of thousands of people have been infected, and therefore we will have to do a lot of tracking, investigation, isolation, and treatment. We are already overloaded, and therefore I'd like to make the following suggestions in order to turn around the corner so that we can see some improvement in the situation and then achieve the dynamic zero infection target. In terms of vaccination and maintaining social distancing and also wearing face masks, that's very important. And here I'd like to advocate to the government that the administration has done a remarkable job in promoting vaccination. But then the most important thing is for people to take the jab in order to reduce the number of serious cases. And still, there is room for improvement when it comes to wearing face masks. Over 80% of those wearing face masks are just wearing common surgical masks. Yes, they'll be able to achieve a 90% filtering effectiveness, but then many people might not be aware of the fact that when they wear a face mask, they would also have to make sure that there would be no gaps on both sides of their faces. And therefore, if they are not able to do so, then they would still be able to inhale the virus from both sides of their faces. And therefore, I would suggest that the relevant legislation should be further amended so that the face mask order can also be revised so that they will have to wear higher level face masks. The most important, and of course the best thing is for them to wear N95 face masks, or they can also make an improvement to the face mask. For example, they have to wear a surgical mask, and then they can also wear a cotton mask on top of that. Or on both sides of the surgical face mask, they can use a clipper in order to make sure that there is no gap. And also, the exemption part under the law can also be revised so that even within households and also in offices and in indoor areas, they would also have to wear a face mask. And recently, if you look at the number of confirmed cases and also presumptive cases, there has been a big surge. And in most cases, we have not been able to track down to the zero, the initial infection source, and therefore we will have to identify all the potential patients, in particular for those without symptoms. On the mainland, if there is a particular district where there is an outbreak, then the central authorities would mobilize some 10 national teams to provide support so that they would set up ad hoc laboratories and also testing laboratories and so on. And they would also ask staff to take specimens and samples so that the daily testing rate could be increased to 5 million to 10 million a day. And then the way to increase the capacity is to do a mixed testing. For example, you can combine, say, 10 to 20 specimens of the patients so that you can do the testing together, and that would greatly boost the testing capacity. And if Hong Kong can also get the full support from the mainland, and if we're able to do 4 million tests a day, I think it's entirely possible. And then once every 2 days, we can complete a universal testing for everyone. And then within 2 to 4 weeks, even for the tracing work that has not been able to catch up, I believe that most of the patients, including those without symptoms, they would also be identified. I think the most important thing is to step up prevention so that there can be early detection and early treatment, because Omicron is airborne, and therefore the best way to prevent it is to ensure that everybody will take the jab that has been underway, and then they would also have to use highly effective face masks like N95. And if we are able to do universal testing within 2 to 4 weeks, and then if we are able to do early detection and so on, then that would also be very effective. I think the most important thing is for the entire community to complete the tests within 2 days. So all you need to do is to identify the patients. So if we are able to do the prevention and early detection, early treatment, and so on, then what needs to be done is to have a large number of hotels and also isolation centers, and also the mobile cabin hospitals like that in Huashanshan and so on, so that the hospital beds can be vacated for those with serious symptoms. I think this is all interlinked, because if one thing is not done properly, then it will have a knock-on effect on the rest. And the situation is overwhelming because given the current situation, there are things that cannot be done. For example, within a very short space of time, if we were to do comprehensive tracing, that is not practicable. And therefore, all we need to do is to find another way out so that we can find another solution. Well, the current situation is that tracing has not been able to catch up, and therefore, in order to prevent the situation from worsening, so that Hong Kong might collapse and we cannot but live with the virus, and therefore we will have to conduct this approach so that we can identify all the patients, and then we would also concentrate all the patients in those isolation facilities and so on. I think these are in fact what has been done on the mainland in terms of dynamic zero infection, and that has been proven to be very effective. And Mr. Xi just announced that he would be giving this instruction to Hong Kong, including the all ensuring and also the two concerns and so on. These are very caring remarks, and therefore, once we are in trouble, everybody will come out to help, and therefore we will have to cherish the support from the central authorities, and Hong Kong's anti-epidemic policy would be led by the government, and then everybody will work together, united, and then we will definitely be able to turn around the corner so that we don't have to have a lockdown, and still we will be able to win in this battle. Thank you. I'd like to remind members that if you'd like to speak again in this session, you will have to press the raise hand button in Zoom, because this is a remote meeting. It is not like a physical meeting. I will not be able to see any of you or all of you when you want to speak, and therefore there are 11 members who have not requested to speak in this session. And if you'd like to speak, please press the raise hand button in Zoom. Yes, Ben Chen. President, thank you. The fifth wave of the epidemic started from the cabin crew, and then when they went to the community, when they went into Kwai Chung Estate, that wreaked havoc. And when there was major chaos in Kwai Chung Estate, if we had been able to conduct a timely, comprehensive testing, and if we were able to timely isolate those who had been infected, then of course things would have been very different. And therefore, to race with time in order to win the battle instead of just lying flat and wait for things to become better. well, that's not going to help. Well, to give Hong Kong people confidence and also to give practical support to Hong Kong people up till now, we can only rely on the central authorities. And once again, they're giving us the much needed support. And with the remarks of Mr. Xi Jinping and also the appeal by Mr. Xi, that also shows the advantage of one country, two systems. Our country will always be the biggest supporter of us and will be able to work wholeheartedly in fighting this epidemic. That's the only way out for us. And therefore, we will have to stand in solidarity and we will have to help one another. Well, up till now, within the community, there are different circumstances. We have seen babies 15 days old and he has been infected and therefore he has to be hospitalized. And there are people who are waiting out there and they are staying home and they don't want to infect their family members and therefore they will have to stroll on the streets.
It's been said that people can do it at home, quarantine at home. But if you live in a subdivided unit, are you going to do this to fight the epidemic, or are you going to do it and spread the virus? We have to bear in mind that different people in Hong Kong have different living accommodation and different needs. Some are living in congested subdivided units, so we have to bear that in mind. I have a few suggestions to make to the SAR government. The focus now should be on isolation instead of testing. We lack sufficient isolation facilities. We have been given assurances by the central government that they will support us in this regard. Should we use other venues such as exhibition and convention venues for isolation facilities? Well, this is worth exploring. If we do not segregate the different groups of affected people, if we don't have any negative pressure, the isolation facilities, we may very soon see another wave coming. The country has given us a lot of support, such as the beds provided next to AWE. Therefore, we survived the previous waves. Some people think that we have seen the worst, and therefore the two facilities have been dismantled. And some of the negative pressure wards and rooms have been dismantled. Now these two facilities at AWE are recommissioned, but there will be no more negative pressure facilities, because now we are accommodating residents of residential care homes for elderly who are infected. And now we have just having cubicles in the AWE facility, no negative pressure there. I've been told by some relatives of these elderly people accommodated at the AWE facilities that they are very concerned that they will be spreading the virus in the AWE because of the lack of negative pressure facilities, and they are not accommodated at our regular hospitals. And even the treatment facilities next to AWE cannot accommodate these people. If there's an outbreak at the isolation facility, then it will be a major source of another outbreak, and the outcome may be very appalling. And that's all because the lack of negative pressure facilities in the beginning. if there were negative pressure rooms for such elderly residents of our CHE, and they are properly accommodated there, and I believe there will be no massive infection among the elderly residents there. I've asked Dr. Law Chi Kong to look into this, and when we have an outbreak there among them, they should be sent to proper facilities. We are going to have some mobile cabin hospitals. I would like to urge the government to go for higher standard in the specification for such hospitals, so that we have some negative pressure facilities built in. And I would like to turn to information dissemination. People interested in knowing what's happening would have to go to the website or wait for the press conference at 4 to 5 p.m. But the briefing is very, very short and actually very brief, and they find it very difficult to get sufficient information about the current situation. I hope the government can set aside a dedicated channel. For example, at RTHK, 1 or 2 channels should be provided to disseminate epidemic-related information, the testing facilities, and quotas available of different facilities. And they can also invite experts to give advice on how to prevent infection. In an epidemic, information is very important to the public. Well, I'm glad to learn that this suggestion of DAB has been accepted by the government, and RTHK would be tasked with this. But I went for that channel, but the message was in writing, and it was rather difficult to understand, and there was no one there to explain the message in clear terms. Many elderly people can only rely on the television sets in their homes. If they cannot understand the written message, how can they do the proper thing to tie in? I hope that the government and the RTHK management can make improvements as soon as possible. In 2019, RTHK was very flexible in offering such services, so why not now? And also the third aspect that I would like to talk about is the vaccination service. Many elderly people have said that the outreach service is very difficult to reach. And some of the outreach teams are saying that they don't have the required doses. And therefore, we have been seeing long queues outside vaccination centers, and people have to go to different clinics, bring their children to inquire about availability of vaccination. And many people ended up disappointed. I know the DOH might find it difficult to deliver all the vaccines there, but what about other departments? Can they also help the DOH? Is it that difficult to deliver the vaccines to the clinics? I hope improvement can be made very soon. The fourth point that I want to talk about is that we should have put in place. We should put in place proper community support. There are people doing home quarantine. They cannot go out. They can't buy food. They have no support. The government hotline is difficult to get through. Well, I understand that those manning the hotline at the other end has also got a very difficult job to cope. And many members' ward officers have received complaints from the public, but we can only do what we can given the limited capacity and resources we have. In our ward office, in my ward office, and those of DAB members have been trying to help outside the vaccination centers and doing whatever the affected patients and confirmed cases would like to have. But we are limited by our resources. I hope the government can expand its community support network. More should be given. I understand that the district officers are working very hard. But again, the resources that they can marshal are very limited as well. And many people have donated resources for distribution to the people in need. We have a test kit. I thank China Enterprise for its donation, and we have also got face masks made in Hong Kong. This illustrates the spirit of mutual help and cooperation in the community. With the support of President Xi, let's hope that we can very soon emerge from the epidemic. Engineer Gary Zhang. Thank you, Mr. President. On this theme of emerging from the epidemic, I would like to say this. The SAR government and LegCo members, as part of the establishment, must put life first, and we should shoulder the common responsibility. According to the DH, from the 1st of January 2020 to the 6th of February, for the age group from 0 to 12, we have more than 230 cases, which is almost equivalent to the annual total of the previous year. For the first 10 days, we have lost 20 valuable lives, young lives, and elderly people who have lost their lives. We have dozens of elderly people and children who have nothing to rely on, to fall back on, except their own immune system. Young people and elderly people, even if they recover from the infection, might have to suffer the aftermath, the side effects. What we have to do is to stop the transmission chains and to go for early detection. We should do more tests, increase our capacity so that fewer people will suffer, and we will not be overburdened our healthcare system, which has been working so hard to help us. So apart from health-related effects, the epidemic has affected education of students. I've received a letter from a 13-year-old student who has come up with a very new idea, and that is all schools should advance their summer holiday to March or April. And if in May the epidemic eases, people can return to school in June and July. I have a child in primary school, another in kindergarten. They are doing classes through online sessions, but the effectiveness is much lower. So they will be staying at home for half of the school term. Of course, we should allow students, DSE students, to go to school as arranged. Such a change would involve administrative work, but we should resort to the special measures in this special time. I hope some special arrangement can be made by the government. Once again, I would like to speak for a minority group. 80% of people, of visitors are here for the purpose of visiting their relatives. They are the spouses or dependents or children of Hong Kong people. So they are part of this, our extended family. So we have urged the government to consider this. That is for the sake of fighting the epidemic. And for all the lawful visitors, if they have been vaccinated and if they are infected here, they will be subject to the same treatment as Hong Kong residents for treatment. I hope the government can act on this quickly. And lastly, although we face a lot of difficulties, don't forget that we have world-class healthcare facilities and highly efficient civil servants and a compassionate population, as well as the support by the whole country. So we should not give up. We adults should face the consequences, and we should not let the vulnerable face the difficulties themselves.
Mr. Chen Yong. Thank you, President. First, the DAB and the NTAS would like to salute to the healthcare staff and the civil servants in fighting the epidemic. And we also very grateful on President Xu's and the mainland residents' love and concern, especially the expert team from the mainland. And Director Minister Xia Long convened in Shenzhen yesterday on the coordination meeting on helping Hong Kong to beat back the epidemic. Hong Kong is just as resourceful as other cities. We managed to defeat SARS and the Black Cloud riots. With the full support of the nation, we are more determined and confident to stop the virus in its tracks. We need to implement a full wartime government that each officials have their main role. I deeply believe that when the public officers arrive at the scene and see the young and the old for themselves, you can come with the solutions. We need to mobilize the public, to mobilize the civil service and the citizens. We need to integrate Chinese and Western medicine and accelerate a tracing treatment and save every life. Well, with the DAB has come along a lot of good suggestions and relate them to the government. In the face of the epidemic, a strong appeal to the public and the government to stand united and will cooperate with the government and our nation's anti-epidemic policy and initiatives. The DAB and the NTAS have all along been organizing and doing and participating in thousands of volunteering activities and continue to build a volunteer corps to provide back office support. We'll also do our utmost to distribute to residents and anti-epidemic supplies. I believe that we can achieve dynamic zero infections and eventual victory. Thank you, President. I so submit. Ms. Lam So Wei. Thank you, President. We are at a more critical stage of the Omicron wave. It's very high transmissible, and the daily case loads is reaching new highs. We had a problem from identification to quarantine and isolation treatment. Some infected cases are wrapped around blankets waiting to be tested, and some seniors told me that they wouldn't dare to leave the queue after getting a reservation number. They don't understand that after getting a reservation, they still have to wait because they're afraid that they may miss their slot. And some residents told me that despite being tested positive, however, she wouldn't dare to leave home, and no one tell them what to do in the hotlines. By the time they seek help from me, they haven't left their home for 7 days. This illustrated that our anti-epidemic resources is at breaking point. At the same time, I respect those who are still serving in the front line. And for the HAD and the DH and colleagues, I would like to thank the volunteers and the community. At the vaccination testing station, and handing out and helping out at the stations, which allowed us to stop the transmission chain. On the other hand, the SAR government should need to refine their practices to achieve build a zero infection mechanism. We should combine overseas and mainland experiences to make sure a better job in information dissemination coordination. I have the following suggestions. First, to implement universal testing. We'd like to thank the central government's support, especially in setting up the Huayan laboratories to boost our testing capacity. It's time to implement universal testing. Government, you need to mobilize civil servants, retired civil servants, and the healthcare staff and the mainland teams. And let's say we should start testing on a Friday night so that by Monday, tests will be completed to reduce the disruption to our daily livelihood. The universal testing must be preceded by the tracking function of the Leave Home Safe app. Second, we need to requisition different buildings as isolation facilities, and we need to accommodate different class of patients and close contacts in order to take forward quarantine and treatment. The CE mentioned that she will look for the entire hotels to provide tens of thousands of hotel rooms. I hope that the government can expedite its work to resolve the shortage of hospital beds in public hospitals. Thirdly, plugging the control and tracking functions. Now, one key aspect in fighting virus will be the accurate and precise control. A few days ago in Hon Starry LEE on estate, some residents complained to me that the leashing house lockdown operation the rumor was circulated a half a day before the government actually arrived. And just one building, 48 confirmed cases were found. Just imagine. Well, due to the news leakage, some confirmed cases flee the building to evade lockdown. And based on the Omicron transmissibility, that it would be imaginable for an outbreak in the Hon Starry. When everyone tried to put the masks together, if someone deliberately stir up panic in the residents and led to our loopholes that will affect our whole operations and effectiveness and prevent us from cutting off the transmission chain. And this leak of confidential news, I hope that the government can attach great importance and investigate thoroughly and give a full account to the public. While the virus have put us on the same boat, the government should help to achieve dynamic zero infection. Viruses are a common enemy. We must put our minds together to emerge from the epidemic. I so submit. Next, Mr. Lee Sai-wing, Stanley. Thank you, President. First, I would like to thank the SAR governments in fighting against the epidemic, especially the healthcare staff, the testing personnel, and the civil aid service. And I would like to thank the Central Blues government step in at this most difficult period. Well, the Omicron virus is spreading very rapidly in Hong Kong. Even though at the early stage the government proposed early identification, isolation, and treatment to stop transmission at the source. However, since in early January, the daily caseload is keeping rising and yet to peak. It seems that we have a problem with the execution of the policy. These SAR government should stick closely to the to the standards of the mainland. From treatment, identification treatment, we must flexibly adjust from time to time while acting decisively, so that the public is willing to cooperate with the government. To beat back the Omicron variant, the government must admit to its shortcomings and improve on them. For example, the lack of tracking function in Leave Home Safe app and cannot confirm the itineraries of confirmed cases, and also the shortage of testing stations and personnel, which led to residents making long trips to different testing stations. And very long queues at the testing station not only heightened the risk of infection, and also they led to queue scalpers. Well, since the healthcare system is overwhelmed, we are having outbreaks everywhere. I know that the government is working with the mainland experts. Hope that the government can inform us in time. On this, the government should make good use of big data and technology, including to add a tracking function if some app not only can identify the close contacts, and we can also identify for those who are present at the same time and place to prevent further spread. And recently, the President issued a key instruction on the Hong Kong Omicron situation and urged the local government to take real responsibility in containing the fifth wave and placing top priority on stability and people's lives, and make it an overriding priority by mobilizing all forces and resources that can be mobilized, and take all necessary measures to ensure the safety and health of the Hong Kong citizens, as well as the ensuring Hong Kong's overall social stability. I'm grateful that the central authorities will fully support and help the government in its anti-epidemic efforts. It's my view that this presidency's instruction pointed the right way for Hong Kong and demonstrated Hong Kong's care and motivated the Hong Kong people to beat back the virus. I believe that the tripartite working coordination mechanism can enhance our various initiatives to make sure that our efforts become more effective and more comprehensive and more targeted. As the mainland is ready to satisfy every demand from Hong Kong, our government should need to boost our testing capacity and support us in terms of materials and logistics. I hope that the government can provide an honest picture of the difficulty we're facing so as to giving the right solution. Besides, the government should crack down on those who deliberately breached the anti-epidemic regulations. Well, since everyone is determined to fight the virus, and even the civil service and the frontline workers are working 24/7 to fight this battle, and yet some residents told me that when the Leashing House of Leon estate is about to be a lockdown, the vice chairman of the Shatin District Council may advise the residents to leave the building to evade testing. On such acts that endanger public health, I urge the government to strictly follow it and toughen up the penalties to deter those who attempt to undermine our anti-epidemic measures. While these elements remains in the minority, most of the Hong Kong people are on the same page with the government, including with the government departments and the civil servants have been working on the front lines to help testing and caring for the sick. And those answering the government's appeal to work as volunteers. I know that you've been working in the front lines, and President, like the Olympic medalist has said, there's no perfect individual, but a perfect team exists.
The SL government must consistently do what Mr. Xi said about the 3 assurances and also the 2 concerns. We must do our job in terms of fighting the epidemic, and we must resume normal cross-boundary activities between Hong Kong and the mainland. With these remarks, I support the motion. Mr. Luk Chung Hong. Thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Well, in this session, we are talking about how we fight the epidemic. Well, many members have already given their views on this. I think the critical thing is about our ability to put things into action. In the past, many people would query whether or not Hong Kong will be able to carry out those initiatives. Will we be able to achieve the target of dynamic zero infection, or should we just lie flat and coexist with the virus, as some might say? In fact, in the face of such a big challenge, on top of that, Mr. Xi also made this very important instruction yesterday, and therefore we will have to act in solidarity. We will have to unite ourselves, and therefore I believe that the critical thing is to adjust our mindset. In the past, we might have thought that Hong Kong was a capitalistic society, and therefore on the mainland, the socialistic practices might not be suitable for Hong Kong. Hong Kong people would not be prepared to accept them, and we would not be able to mobilize in such a large scale, despite the fact that our infrastructure has always been very good. Our professional healthcare people are very professional, but then still, some would still question whether or not it's feasible. And I think this epidemic has given us this golden opportunity so that we can also revamp and reform our society. And here what I'd like to say is we will have to think out of the box. We have to have some breakthroughs so that we will have to act together. And we must adhere to the principle of being people-oriented, or else we would not be able to put one country, 2 systems principle to the full play. And therefore, the only point that I'd like to add is that today we have also heard news that starting from the middle of next month, there might be a chance that we'd be able to carry out universal testing or citywide testing for everyone. Well, people have told me, how come we have to wait for another month? By that time, the epidemic could become even more serious. And therefore, I'd like to urge all the officials in the government, including the all members of the community, we will have to mobilize all the resources available. We must not let Mr. Xi down, because the central authorities have been very concerned about this, and we will have to step up our efforts. Universal testing is something that must be done, and we will have to do it expeditiously. These are my remarks. Next, Mr. Lau Kwok Fan. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. In fact, many people have talked about the epidemic during this session. The situation is that it's developing very rapidly, it's spreading fast. We have seen exponential increase in numbers. And of course, I understand that the government has been working very hard, including tightening up some of the anti-epidemic measures. And also, they've also introduced this vaccine pass in order to better protect the community. Yet, despite all these measures, while they have been announced, when it comes to actual implementation, we have not been able to catch up, in particular in terms of manpower and resources. I can give you some examples. For example, they have announced that some premises would be put under restriction testing, and instead of testing 6 times, 3 times, and then 2 times, they have to adjust the number of tests in accordance with the situation. Another example is that even if people would like to take the jab, it's not that easy to make a booking, whether or not it's BioNTech or Sinovac. Well, I personally did this yesterday. We went down to the vaccination centers. For example, recently the administration announced that they would be introducing another vaccination center near the Woheng Park. And very often people would just rush there to take the jab. And many people are taking the first jab. And yesterday, they've also organized this vaccination initiative, and there were long queues seen. So what we can see is that many people would like to echo the call of the government by taking the jab and taking the test and so on. And yet in the community, we have a shortage of such facilities, or we simply do not have enough resources to give them what they need. And therefore, whether it's about the manpower or resources, despite all the guarantee, we will have to ensure that things would be better coordinated so that when the jabs are available, we will be able to do it expeditiously instead of just requiring people to comply with government's advice on the one hand, and yet if they're not able to find a place to take the jab, then it's not going to work. And of course, people have been working very hard, in particular those working at the front line, in view of the fact that we have seen a big surge in the infection numbers from hundreds to thousands, and now we're talking about tens of thousands. And we have seen groups and also companies offering rapid tests, but then not every medical staff is able to have access to that. And I know somebody who has been in contact with one of the confirmed cases, and yet when he tries to get the rapid test kits, he hasn't been able to get it, and therefore he and his family members have been very concerned. And therefore, where resources permit, I would hope that I think the most important thing is we do what the central authorities have said. We will do our best to protect the safety and health of the people. And where supplies are inadequate, we can also ask the central authorities to provide us with what we need. And during this period, I've been helping with food supplies, and I've been helping the cross-boundary drivers to make sure that arrangements are in place. And I've also contacted Mr. Frankie Chang. He's the secretary responsible for logistics, and we hope that more can be done about it. Last but not least, as I said, the outbreak is serious, and isolation facilities are not adequate, and therefore they're going to make use of the blocks in Queens Hill Estate in order to convert it into an isolation facility. But then I would question this, because it's not like Chunman Estate last year when it was used as a quarantine estate. But then for Queens Hill, it has already seen population intake, and if there are isolation blocks there, then they would just be in the middle of the residential developments, and it's not just that residents would be very worried. It's also going to increase the cross-infection risk. So under the instruction of the central authorities, we have to act in a more coordinated and focused manner so that we can come up with community isolation facilities instead of using places where that they might actually increase the risk of cross-infection. So we will have to think twice about using that estate as a quarantine estate. I would urge that the government should consider using cruises and also some transitional housing places for quarantine purposes, instead of using a public housing estate that has already seen the first batch of population intake for that purpose. These are my remarks for the first session. Thank you. Next, Mr. Kwok Wai Kang. Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy. First of all, I'd like to thank all healthcare professionals at the front line and also all the workers at the front line, because they've worked most dedicatedly to serve us. And at the same time, I'd like to boost the morale of the community, because there might be some anti-epidemic fatigue. But then if we suffer from this fatigue, that would greatly shake the morale in fighting this epidemic. And therefore, the most important thing for us to do is to work together. And for those who are soccer fans, they know that playing a long game is very difficult, and a defensive game is particularly difficult, because morale is everything. In other words, you don't want to lose, you don't want to lie flat, and coexisting with the virus would mean that we are surrendering. We would be prepared to live with the enemy. That's not what we should be doing. Next, we also have to have confidence. We have to have hope, because we have managed to achieve some good results. For example, before the fifth wave, Hong Kong has done remarkably well, and Hong Kong people have also managed to return to some normalcy in most of the time, and therefore we must not give up. We have to have hope and confidence. Thirdly, as I said, we will have to act in solidarity in fighting this defensive battle, or else we wouldn't see the hope of winning. And fourthly, it's very important is the approach that we adopt for every single individual, including those working at the front line and the community at large. We will have to hang on to our post. We will have to take the target as winning the battle. We have to win it. And therefore, we will have to work together and put our heads together in order to achieve that target. Firstly, we have to stay healthy, because without health, nothing can be done. So we're talking about playing in adverse conditions. So when the CCP celebrated its centennial celebrations, so we can see that when it was first founded in 1921, they went through a lot of hardship and difficulties. But then the most important thing is that they had always been fighting and working in the interests of the community. And that's the most important thing. And earlier on, our female soccer team managed to win the battle by 3-2 when they fought against Korea. And they also won the Asian Cup. That's also one of the recent examples. And of course, you might say that for the men's team, well, they also lost because instead of getting bronze, they actually lost. So with the instruction from Mr. Xi, with our country's support and also the strong support from our country, we should have confidence in fighting this epidemic. But then I'd just like to share with you some of the situations on the ground, because I've also received cases in which the concerned people who were civil servants, and they had to stay home to fight the epidemic. And last Friday, well, he started to develop symptoms, and he went to a center for testing, and then initial results were available because he went to the hospital for testing, and he was tested preliminary positive. And then by Tuesday, he called me, and then by Tuesday night, he was still not able to get the confirmation number. I suspect that earlier on, the hospital testing would have to be confirmed again by the DFH. That's the problem. And now, as far as I understand it, this gap will bring about problems, and it's quite serious. Because for this particular colleague, according to what he told us, as the CHP has not been able to give him this confirmation number, and as a result, his family members cannot justify that they are close contacts of this confirmed case, and as they have not yet been classified as close contacts, they cannot just refrain from reporting for duty. But then they have been very conscientious, and they took their days off, they took leave. But then not everybody would be like that, because if they have not received the message confirming that they are close contacts, then inevitably they will have to go back to work, and that would only increase the risk of transmission.
I hope the Center for Health Protection should step up its liaison with the hospital. As long as it's a confirmed case, inform the patient at once and give him or her a case number quickly. Without that number, that patient cannot report the case to the authority, so that the authority can inform those who have met him previously, and this would certainly not good for prevention. And on Tuesday, we have the AEF 6.0 item. We want to make sure that people are assured and the morale is maintained. Many people are at their wits' end because of the epidemic. So I hope that if there's a surplus in the funds of AEF, more will be devoted to the maintenance of morale. And also we would like to make sure that everyone is kept informed, and people don't have to focus on the press conference every afternoon for the latest information. Such information should be provided as soon as possible so that people can get well prepared. Lastly, I wish that everyone would chip in. Let's stand united, stay healthy, and fight this epidemic together. Thank you. There's no other member who wishes to speak. I'll invite the 5 public officers to speak. Secretary